I have with me right now Associate Dean, Executive Director of Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty, Alan Mendenhall. Good afternoon, Alan.
Hi, Donna. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you, and just really been anxious to talk with you since the election, and to get your thoughts, basically on the discussing the U.S. Supreme Court in light of this election.
Right. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court is a major is going to have a major impact here because this election was in no small part an election about who the next Supreme Court justice is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say that Merrick Garland, Barack Obama's nominee, has now been tabled, and he is no longer an option, and that President Trump will be nominating somebody pretty quickly in his first days in office, and I think that will be a very important issue in the confirmation hearings. Is the direction of the court and what type of person he's going to nominate. Right now, with the death of Scalia, you have Roberts, Alito, and Thomas sort of holding the conservative wing of the court, and then you have Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan holding the liberal side, and Kennedy still remains that kind of wishy-washy guy in the middle that's hard to predict. But you no longer have a 4-4 split of four conservatives and 4 liberals, because after Scalia's death, the right lost that sort of definite conservative vote, and so now it's time for President Trump to nominate somebody to fill that spot, and it would not surprise me in the least if he were to tap our own Judge Bill Pryor on the 11th Circuit to that position.
What makes you say that?
Well, I think that Pryor is someone who has a lot in common with Scalia. They share a lot of the same approaches to judging. They have similar judicial philosophies, sometimes called textualism, sometimes called originalism. And I recently heard Judge Pryor give a pretty interesting speech on statutory interpretation, in which he analyzed Justice Scalia's approach to judging and sort of his hermeneutics when it comes to statutory interpretation. And I believe that Judge Pryor has a lot in common with Justice Scalia, and not just in the jurisprudential sense, but also just as a person. They're both Catholic men, and I think they have similar backgrounds, at least as far as shared values and common vocabulary and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the biggest reason Trump was voted in as president could be because of his thoughts on the U.S. Supreme Court?
Oh, absolutely.
You think that was the final straw?
Well, I think it was a major factor, because you had a lot of never Trumpers out there, a lot of people that said, I'm conservative, I'm Republican, but I'm not going to vote for Trump. But I think at the end, as all the analysts were saying on the night of the election, was these people came home. They ended up voting Republican. They ended up voting for the conservative party, despite whatever they thought, about Donald Trump. And I think the reason is because of the Supreme Court and its importance to this election. And it's not just the Supreme Court; it's all the federal courts. We have vacancies at lower-level federal courts here in Alabama that need to get filled, and Barack Obama tried to fill some of those seats without consulting Senator Sessions and Senator Shelby, and of course that's just a dead end. But I think those seats will all get filled now under President Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with Senator Sessions and the relationship he has with Mr. Trump.
That's right. He was one of the first. I think he was the first sitting senator to come out in favor of Trump, and it will be exciting to see where Senator Sessions ends up, whether he'll stay in the Senate or whether he'll become the Secretary of Homeland Security. Maybe he'll be Attorney General. Maybe he'll be, the Defense Secretary. I've even heard him being discussed as Secretary of Defense. But I think he'll have his options open to him if that's the direction he wants to go. And of course, he may just want to stay in the Senate. I don't know. But if he wants to join the Trump administration, I think he's got the door wide open, and that would result in all kinds of new and interesting things, because then you have a Senate vacancy here in Alabama that would need to be filled, and somebody would have to fill that. And all this is coming right before the the elections in 2018 when we'll get new governor, new lieutenant governor, two
This will be a
new
busy
Alabama
time in
Supreme Court
Alabama.
justices.
Because who we get to fill that seat is going to be an important issue as well.
That's correct. It will be.
Absolutely. Well, how do you think President Trump could reshape the Supreme Court and the country, in your opinion?
Well, I sort of believe that on the issue of the Supreme Court, Trump has consulted his advisors. I think it's one of those areas that may be just outside of his expertise, and so he's relying on people for advice. I know before the first presidential debate, he had sought some advice from a couple think tanks in D.C., and he came out with Judge Bill Pryor and Judge Dianne Sykes in that debate. That was the debate immediately following Scalia's death. And he has assembled a list of roughly 21 names of judges and jurists who could fill the Supreme Court vacancy. And it's a pretty impressive list of people, and it does have some geographic diversity and some diversity in the sense of what types of courts people sit on. After the Obergefell decision, there was a lot of chatter about, the U.S. Supreme Court is not representative of America. We have, a bunch of Ivy League educated people and no Protestants on the court, and they come from mostly the Northeast, from a handful of schools, from sort of wealthy backgrounds for the most part, and they're just not representative of the rest of America. So I think that some geographic diversity, which Trump has on his list, is a good thing. He's got people from all regions of the country. He's got some state Supreme Court justices on his list, which is unique because most of the time you're pulling from federal circuit court judges. It's an exciting list. He's got a sitting senator, Mike Lee, who's on the list, which is interesting. And so I'm excited to see who with the nomination.
What kind of time frame do you think this will entail? Because, Donald Trump is a businessman, where he makes decisions and they're done basically overnight. But he's dealing with the government here.
Well,
so
I think a lot of that will depend on... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What about the transition? Because my husband and I used to do business with the government, and I'll have to tell you, it was always nice. The monies that were brought in were pretty nice, but the time it took, it was just unreal.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you would raise that because, historically the Supreme Court nominations sort of flew through, and it wasn't really until the 1980s, in particular with Robert Bork's nomination, that things really started backing up, and Senate confirmation hearings took longer and longer, and I'm talking specifically for the Supreme Court nominees. I suspect if Trump had his way, he would have a nominee, and that nominee would be voted on within the first month, and things would be wrapped up quickly and smoothly. But I don't think that will be the case. I think the Democrats will resist. Right now, the Senate Judiciary Committee, which will be sort of controlling the hearings, consists of a majority of Republicans. There are actually 11 Republicans and 9 Democrats. Some of the Republicans include Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, David Perdue, Jeff Sessions, Orrin Hatch, some of these strong Republican, strong conservatives. So, to the extent that they can control those hearings, I think that will be helpful to whoever the nominee is. But also, there is a Republican majority in the Senate, and all it requires to get this nomination, to get this person confirmed, is a majority. Now, the Democrats could try to filibuster, in which case things get a little messy because then the Republicans would have to have that supermajority to invoke cloture and get that candidate in, which would require them to get some Democrats on board. And, I think a lot of Democrats are probably upset after the way the Republicans refused to vote on Merrick Garland, Obama's nominee. So I suspect there will be some resistance to anyone Trump puts up, unless he just surprises everyone and puts up some kind of moderate. But if he picks somebody from the list, I think he'll be okay. There's some people on the list that may be less well known than others. I'm thinking about, for example, there's a guy named Keith Blackwell, and he's a justice on the Supreme Court of Georgia, and he's been a justice there for about 4 years. And there's not a lot to be known about his judicial philosophy. I mean, somebody will obviously be coming through his opinions on that court, but he's not a nationally known figure, and someone like that could be a surprise pick for Trump.
Well, what do you think about? I know there was some bad blood between them, but what do you think about Senator Ted Cruz?
Oh, I think he would be a fascinating Supreme Court justice. I've always said, in fact, before the election, I said I thought Ted Cruz would be best as a Supreme Court justice. I think, I think he lacked a little bit of the charisma that someone like Donald Trump had on the campaign trail, and I just think something like Supreme Court fits him better, and I really think he would be a phenomenal Supreme Court justice.
Well, his knowledge is just incredible. His
He
knowledge
is.
of everything, I mean, he is just incredible. I'm like you. I couldn't see him as president.
Well, he's got the perfect resume for Supreme Court justice. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you can't make it up on a piece of paper better than that. I mean, he's served as the Solicitor General in Texas. He's clerked on the Supreme Court. He's got a lot of judicial experience. He's got experience in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
He would be a great choice because he would get to serve for a long time as well and really make a long-term impact. Now, whether that's something he wants, I don't know, but I think he would have probably the most influence long-term in that position.
We know how this is the way I view Trump, and this is from doing, and I need to start saying President Trump. Very sure, I need to introduce him that way. But from what the research I've done on him, it's not necessarily. I know everybody says he's ego and all this, but I don't see him that way at all. I see him as being the kind of guy, let bygones be bygones. I want to make a success of it. I would think he has hired people before that he didn't particularly care for. It's just that they could get the job done, and I think he's still looking at him. I don't just a feeling. It would just be whether Senator Cruz would hold that animosity against him.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the people on Donald Trump's list for all his cabinet positions as well as the Supreme Court. I just think it's hard to know at this point who's going to be there. I mean, we obviously know now that Reince Priebus is going to be the chief of staff of the White House.
And what do you think about that option?
Well, it's funny. I heard that Michael Savage, the radio show host, conservative talk show radio host, has come out today and sort of criticized Trump for the choice and saying that Priebus is too establishment and that he promised to drain the swamp and all these sorts of things. But the chief of staff, I mean, and I appreciate that perspective. I guess the counter to that is, you don't want to completely alienate yourself in the presidency on day one, and you don't want to make enemies of the people you're going to have to work with who are also Republicans. So I think by tapping Priebus and Steve Bannon simultaneously and having Steve Bannon in this more kind of undefined role, it's a message to basically everyone that, yes, I am going to work with establishment, but I am not your typical establishment candidate. I'm not your typical politician. This is why I'm having two people serve in what's basically one position. I mean, we don't really know how those two roles will be separated or defined, but it is sort of an unusual move, especially to be the first kind of move to make.
It is at that. I wanted to mention to everyone, you can give us a call. Well, actually, you can't call us right now because we have Alan Mendenhall with us. Is by phone. Are you in Montgomery right now?
I am. I'm on the campus of Faulkner University right now.
Awesome. If you would like to send a text, if you have a question, you can send that text to 256-659-4319. We would be glad to take your question. And I have with me Associate Dean, Executive Director of Blackstone Center in Law and Liberty, Alan Mendenhall. Now, Alan, you mentioned just a few moments ago, now this is a woman's idea behind a man's idea, okay? About what would the other folks, what would the Democrats do? Would they try to go against President-elect Trump? Would they try to go against him? Or would they try to work with him? And this is my thoughts. Basically, everybody, the establishment included, of Republicans, were all afraid of Donald Trump. and as he was
Right.
running for president. So do you think they still have not necessarily fear, but what he might do? Do you think that might be in the back of their mind? Could that hamper them, or could that actually be a positive in their working with Mr. Trump?
Well, I think unpredictability is always, to some extent, an asset in a leader, because if you're too predictable, then you play your hand. You telegraph, and it's just like a quarterback looking at the receiver he's going to throw the pass to, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
knows, the pass is coming, and you're going to get an interception. So there is something to be said for artful deception, but as far as the Democrats working with Republicans, I guess it would just be a policy by policy issue. I mean, it's hard to say. I do think that a lot of people on the left are disturbed by this election. I think they probably are surprised by it, and I think they are concerned that maybe the populace there's just a mismatch, a disconnect between what they believe and think and what the majority of American voters think and believe. And I think the Democratic Party is going to have to do a little bit of soul searching here if they want to succeed in the next midterm elections. If they want to compete, I think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have sort of tapped into the white middle class voter in a way that Donald Trump did. And when Bernie Sanders when his candidacy was done, it became Hillary Clinton. I truly do believe some Sanders voters went over to Trump on issues like trade. I think appealed to those voters, and issues like immigration appealed to those voters. So when I listen to stations like NPR in the morning, and I hear commentators say, "Oh, this is outrageous. No Sanders voter would ever go to Trump." I don't think that's the case. I think that's an example of these national reporters being just out of touch and not realizing who their base is. In fact, I heard that Howard Dean wants to be the DNC chair again, and he basically came out today and said something to that effect. But we gotta recover the white working class vote if we want to win elections.
Mm-hmm. Paul Ryan, and he mentioned that last week, that actually Donald Trump saw something that no one else saw, and that's why he won the election. I
Well,
mean,
if you had
he was
told
saying it
me,
in a very friendly way as well.
yeah, I mean it's remarkable. I mean, Trump won in states where Mitt Romney just did not compete. If you had told me a month or two ago that Donald Trump would have won Wisconsin,
Oh,
Michigan,
that blew my
Ohio,
mind.
Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, I would have said there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
But he did, and it was a big surprise. And I was flipping back and forth on the evening of the election between Fox News and CNN, and you had Wolf Blitzer up there saying, "Well, it's still a nail biter. It's still a nail biter." And, hours before that, Megyn Kelly had basically was treating it as if it were a done deal. Like, wow, Donald Trump won. The pollsters got this all wrong, and so even in the styles of reporting, you saw a pretty big difference.
Well, it's like they didn't know what to say. And,
It's true. It
but
was pretty surprising.
But did you get the sense they were dragging it out just to see if by possible wild dream Hillary Clinton could win? I mean, it's just they didn't declare it soon enough.
I think there was some of that. Some of it's probably ratings related. If you can squeeze a few more hours out of viewers, and but then there's also the whole Bush v. Gore thing and calling Florida too early back in 2000, and nobody wants to do that and be responsible for that kind of a blunder. So it's hard for me to really say, not being on the inside of those business decisions, but I suspect there was a little bit of both caution and ratings. But I think when it was clear that Hillary Clinton wasn't going to come out and make a speech and all her supporters were told to go home, I think that was the moment where everyone kind of knew that Trump
done.
had this thing in the bag.
It was over. Less than a minute left in this segment. You going to hang around for the next segment?
I can, if you would like me to. I'd be happy to.
We would love to, because we have some questions that have been actually sent in
Okay.
his text, so we'd like for you to answer those as well. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Donna Thiesel, and I'm your host of Afternoon Drive Home. And I have with me right now Alan Mendenhall. He is the Associate Dean, Executive Director at Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty. Hi, Alan. Great to have you back.
Hi. Hi, Donna. Thanks.
Well, it's always great to have you on. Alan, let's talk about you just a little bit. Did this brief introduction, but let's talk about what you do and where you're at.
Sure. Yeah, I am an associate dean and the executive director of the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty. We actually had a name modification since we last spoke. So we're now the Blackstone and Burke Center. We had a trademark issue to resolve. So we're the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty.
Okay.
Our website is www.blackstoneandburke.com. And we are housed in the law school at Faulkner University in Montgomery. And we have several really impressive national board members, including Judge Andrew Napolitano from Fox News, Robert P. George from Princeton, Jim Stoner from LSU, Dr. Don Devine, who was director of the Office of Personnel Management under the Reagan administration, Dr. Ingrid Gregg, who was president of the Earhart Foundation, Professor Frank Buckley from George Mason University, Daniel Mark from Villanova. We've got a really excellent group together for our board. And we examine the common law tradition and American constitutionalism, and examine all the rights that are involved in that tradition, from the Magna Carta to the Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution, and the American Bill of Rights, and within the first 10 amendments of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's awesome having you on the show. I know you're a very, very busy person, and thank you again for being on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Always. Anytime you'd like to be on, you just give me a call and let me know.
Okay.
Now, we were talking again about President-elect Donald Trump and the possibilities, and we're discussing again the U.S. Supreme Court in light of this election. And another thing that was brought up, in one of our listeners just sent a text about this, and this was about abortion rights and about a woman's rights. How do you feel that fit into the election?
Well, I it didn't seem to be a big central issue in the election. I didn't see, I mean, it was discussed in the debates, but it was never really at the forefront of any of those debates. I think if the debates had taken into account the Supreme Court more than they did, you would have probably had that issue discussed even more, because people would have been talking about Roe v. Wade and whether it will be overturned or parts of it will be overturned and that sort of thing. So, I'm just not sure how much it played in the election. I just really don't know, and I don't know how to measure that.
Mm-hmm. That's a hard thing to do, because I think most people were what the buzz I was hearing here in this area basically was the Supreme Court and who would he appoint.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about that, and obviously immigration was a huge issue this time around, and trade was a huge issue this time around, and quite frankly, an issue that's not even an issue, which is just kind of being anti-establishment, was a major factor, I believe, in this election. It sort of, it's a phenomenon that floats outside any sort of policy category. It just was an attitude. It was just sort of in the air.
Mm-hmm. Did you listen to the 60 Minutes interview last night?
I did not listen to the 60 Minutes interview. I've seen some reports about what was said in it, but I did not get to hear it.
I turned it off after about 10 minutes because she began about how afraid people were. I don't know what you would be afraid of. I was afraid of the last 8 years myself. But I'm looking at this as a turning point. It's a page where you can forget the past and just move on. Just go.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people that are being a little bit unfair about it is they're talking about how, well, in the last elections, people weren't afraid. Well, there were a lot of people who were afraid. I was afraid. I mean, I was afraid of the powers the Obama administration was exercising over the states, and sort of the transformations that Obama undertook for our military and for just several areas of life. I mean, I can't think of a president who actually changed America so fundamentally in 8 years. I mean, I can. I mean, obviously there's some, but not in my lifetime, at least. It really was a major change, and I think people were angry about it. I mean, if you just look at the way the Affordable Care Act passed, I mean, we're talking about Obamacare here. I mean, after the death of Senator Ted Kennedy, Democrats were afraid they were going to lose the votes when Republican Scott Brown took Kennedy's seat in the special election. And so the Democrats basically rammed the Affordable Care Act through the Senate on a straight party line with not a single Republican vote and with several Democratic senators not voting for it.
Mm-hmm.
And people were furious at that. People were really mad, and the Tea Party sort of rode that wave to power. And then people were mad at those politicians because they campaigned on, repeal and replace Obamacare, or repeal and replace Obamacare, and then they were elected to office and they did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made people even more furious because it just suggested that, there's just a certain type of person who becomes a politician,
mm-hmm.
or the system itself is flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were mad. I think Donald Trump, who was not a politician, who was somebody who did largely self-fund his campaign, really appealed to people, and they just really wanted to just kind of stick it to the establishment.
Mm-hmm. I think so too, and I think that's exactly what happened. And you were talking just, the last 8 years, and, the anger of the young people who grew up in that 8-year era. I feel like it was an unfortunate thing for them to grow up during that era because they're doing things that are, I wasn't happy with Obama being brought in as president for the past 2 terms, but I didn't go out and, like damage property or anything like that. And so what does that say about people who do that? I mean, you don't get your way and you just go out and destroy.
Well, I guess there are just different people out there doing that for different reasons. I think some people may be going out there and just taking advantage of a situation of chaos where they just want to go out and destroy things with impunity, and they take this opportunity. They don't really care that much about the election, and they just sort of believe all the epithets and name calling and accusations that get thrown around, and don't really take the time to analyze the issues or to examine the results of this election in any sort of reasonable way. And they just sort of go out and loot and destroy. It shows a real lack of respect for private property rights and just common decency.
It does, but I want to say this, don't think all young people are that way, because they're not. We live in an exceptional area, and, our young people are very respectful, and you're going to have a few, they're going to try to, pull the plug, but I mean, overall, it's just, I don't think it's that way in most cities of the United States. And I'm saying this because I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. My husband and I lived there for 9 years. And, when this thing went on in Charlotte, North Carolina a few weeks ago, the people of Charlotte are not like that. It's totally, they're just not that way.
Well, that's right. And it's not a representative sampling of people. No. And, of course, we know that that some of the protesters that were outside of Trump rallies were being paid to be there, mm-hmm. which is just a disgrace. But we know that was the case, and I would not be surprised in the least if some investigative reporter were to uncover the fact that some of these other protests mm-hmm. are also being funded by outside parties. And I think these protests are going to be a real issue for Trump when he takes office, because I'm not sure. I mean, I think they'll sort of ease up here in the next coming months, but then after inauguration, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see these flare up again. And of course, we've had protests like this in different cities, just for example, Ferguson, within the last few years. So, I see these things as, I don't know if they're systemic, but they're certainly possible. They certainly may spring up again in the near future, and it will be interesting to see how President Trump handles them, because he he did run as a law and order candidate.
Definitely. But again, a little bit of fearing God in there too, so that might help a little bit. What are your thoughts on all of his children are going to stay in the business, but the son-in-law coming in? I don't have a lot of information on that. What could you tell us about that?
Well, I don't really have a lot of information on that too. I think with all of the people Trump will surround himself with, we have a lot of mystery. I think it's kind of exciting to see who's going to be in this position, in these positions. I mean, we've got to fill a Secretary of State, we got to fill a Secretary of the Treasury, a Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Homeland Security and Veterans Affairs, and the Secretary of Education. I mean, they're just a lot of cabinet level positions that have to be filled. And while there's some names that are being floated around, we just really don't know who's going to be there. And I think that will be revealing, whether Trump does decide to go with some more establishment figures or whether he does try to find some outsiders, some people that aren't involved in Washington politics.
In your opinion, what should Newt Gingrich, what should he do?
Well, I suspect he's going to be in the running for some cabinet level position. I've heard his name tossed around for Secretary of State. I've heard his name tossed around for Secretary of the Interior. So, I really don't know what his role is going to be, but I suspect he'll have one.
Again, he was loyal. And
he was loyal. That's
and
right.
I think that President-elect Donald Trump, I think he rewards loyalty.
I think that's probably true, and I think it'll be, for that reason, it'll be really interesting to see, what people like Chris Christie and Jeff Sessions end up doing, and Rudy Giuliani. Where's Rudy Giuliani going to fall? I mean, of those three, one of them I would imagine is going to be the Attorney General. Of course, Sessions has experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's got experience being the Attorney General of a state, our state, and he served in the Senate for a long time. I think he is probably the most natural candidate for the position, but I also suspect, and this is just a hunch, that Rudy Giuliani wants that position too. And with Chris Christie's demotion last week from head of the transition team to being just another guy on the transition team, that's really a signal that Christie probably won't be in that Attorney General slot. And with the Bridgegate scandal kind of in his shadows, I'm not sure he's really who you would want to be there after all the attention that was paid to Hillary Clinton's sort of email scandal and her corruption and the Clinton Foundation and all these kinds of things. That I don't think Trump wants to invite similar criticisms by putting Christie in that Attorney General slot.
Well, do you think that Mr. Trump will indict Hillary Clinton? Or do you think that's just going to go away?
I think that will be sort of up to the FBI. I mean, I don't think she'll be indicted for the things that we know about. The question is if there was anything shady going on with the Clinton Foundation. I know there's some ongoing investigations there. So if there's something we don't know about, then, possibly. But I don't see him. I think the election's over. I think he's moved.
He's ready
beyond
to move
that.
on.
Unless there's just something totally surprising that comes up, then I wouldn't think there would be an indictment.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think he should just let it go.
Yeah, I suspect that's what he wants to do. At this point, enough of the American people are bitter about the election that you don't want to.
Well, that would just
you
give
don't
your
want to cause
riders
more of these riots we're
right.
talking about.
Absolutely. Just had a text in just a few moments ago about his campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway.
Yeah.
Do you think she saved the election?
Oh, I think she did a great job. There's no doubt about it. She was very articulate, very impressive. I'm curious to see where she ends up, whether she'll end up in the administration or whether she'll just end up going somewhere and making a lot of money in the private sector, which it certainly makes a lot of sense because I understand she's got some young children, and so that may be a better option for her. But regardless, I think she did a really excellent job in turning the election. I think between her and Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus, they all three helped Trump sort of stay focused and towards the end stay off Twitter, and and really that kind of stuff, that just sort of that discipline at the end was very important.
And this, and from one of our listeners, her name is Sarah, and Sarah wants to know what you think about Donald Trump's wife. What kind of a first lady she would be?
Well, gosh, that is a good question, and I don't know. I mean, I do think she is a very dignified person. I do think this is sort of an odd conversation to have, but I do think that the Donald Trump presidency brings back the ideal of glamour in a way that Americans haven't seen in a long time. I mean, there was a time when our Hollywood stars were, Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, Katharine Hepburn, these sorts of glamorous figures. And, lately we've got presidents up there that won't even, bother to put on a tie. They'll just, I think Trump brings a level of class and dignity to the office that is unique. He's got a little bit, obviously, his mouth. He's no gentleman, but he brings a different kind of celebrity to the office.
Well, image is important to him. The suit, the tie, that kind of thing. And I'll have to tell you, the past few years, my background has been corporate and government sales. And I always felt like I had to dress the part. I always felt like I needed to wear a suit. But with the relaxed dress that we've had in the past few years, you're a little bit out of place if you're dressed like that. People look at you like, oh, are you going to buy it? You're going to buy the company if you walk in like that. I would love to see that come back, because I don't know. It to me, it's more like you care for that person you're talking with. Your accounts, the people that you talk with in business. You're bringing a little bit of, I care about you, so I care about the way I look.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Both my grandfathers wore suits every day, and I sort of noticed that when I was growing up, and I am one of my few friends that will basically do that. I'm in the legal community, so we have a lot of people in our community who do dress up suit and tie every day. But my friends who work in other industries, they have a very casual work environment, and I think you probably, I've seen studies out there. I don't know how all these studies get put together, whether they're accurate, but there are studies out there. You can just do a quick Google search and find how people who dress up for work and wear suit and tie and these sorts of things end up being more productive. And, maybe there's something to it. I don't know whether those, how scientific those are, but from a purely anecdotal basis, I sort of see that playing out.
Absolutely. I noticed, I always look at a person's children, and, the way they behave, the success of the children. To me, that says a lot about the father and the mother as well. But all of his children seem to be successful. And they want to win. Do you think we're going to bring that mentality back?
Well, I think we'll find out. I really do. I'm not sure because of how divided the country is, but I sure hope that the effort is made.
Yeah, but something, I'm 57 years old, and this is something I've noticed in my 57 years of life. People want to be popular. They want to go with what's in now. And I don't know. I just, I think it could be a change for the mentality, because right now he's perceived as the winner. Everybody wants to be on the winner's side. And,
Right.
Maybe some of those things might change.
You never know. You never know.
You can't call it. It's just impossible to call. But I feel the same way about his wife as you do. I think there could be some elegance brought back in. I always thought the Kennedy time with Jackie O was a great time. The way she dressed, there was this form of elegance there.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I'm referring to. There's a sort of a social critic named Camille Paglia, and she makes some of these points about Donald Trump and his family, and sort of the elegance and glamour that they bring. to the office.
Absolutely. Well, I think we have about 2 minutes left in this segment. Anything else you would like to bring to the table?
Well, I think it's clearly a transitional moment in our nation's history. In the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville was traveling through America. He's a French guy, and he writes, "A great democratic revolution is taking place among us. Everyone sees it, but not everyone judges it in the same way." And I sort of feel as if that quote embodies our own moment. I sort of feel as if that's what we are feeling, and I think what comes out of it is as much for us to determine as it is for Trump. Everybody has a role to play in society and in our basic associational life and in all the mediating institutions that we're a part of, churches, little leagues, communities, community events, all kinds of groups, clubs. And if we all do our own small part in our own community, we, in the aggregate, make our country a better place.
Absolutely. And it starts here. It starts in your community. It starts with you and the family. And then
That's
it
right.
moves on to the community. So I'm so glad to hear you say that. Well, so awesome having you on the show again today.
Well, thank you, Donna. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.